Okay, we're now recording. Well, welcome. It's 7 o'clock. So I'll introduce Richard and then we'll kick off. So Heptonstall Museum building, from looking at all the names, I think you all know the building, but it goes back quite a long way. And Richard McFarlane, as our speaker this evening, is the manager of Calderdale Museums. And how long have you worked at Calderdale, Richard?
I first started working for Calderdale Museums in 1996.
Wow, right, that's great. Well, you should know.
5 years coming up now.
Lovely. Okay, so Richard will, as per usual, will have an address. Now, in terms of asking questions, there is a chat facility. If you've not used Zoom before, some of you I know have, but there's a chat facility, and that's the speech bubble at the bottom. The other way is just click on that, and you can just type in a question, and you can do that at any point during the address, and we'll make a note of them. Linda Maynard is also sort of co-hosting. And the other way is that after Richard's finished speaking, there is a raised hand facility. If you click on the participants icon, and then you'll get the opportunity to virtually, you kind of click on a raised hand icon next to your name, and then we'll take the questions, audibly in that order. The reason I sound a bit hesitant is because if you're the host electronically of the meeting, you can't see that virtual function. Okay, so yeah, just after 7. So Richard, I'll leave it to you to introduce the subject and yourself a bit more if you wish.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm Richard McFarlane. I'm the museums manager for Calderdale Museums. As just said to Michael, I've been working with Calderdale Museums since 1996, when I first started as a documentation assistant. So I've been with the service for quite some time. Not quite sure how I ended up doing this talk this evening. I think there's probably far better qualified people to talk about the history of Heptonstall and Heptonstall Museum within the Heptonstall Historical Society than me, but the technology I'm on is just on a phone, so I'm not sure whether this will it will be technology dependent connections and battery power and things like that. Also, being on my phone, I can't necessarily see all the interactions in the chat and stuff. So if you do have any questions, if you pass them through one of the hosts, then I will answer them as best I can. But otherwise, in a somewhat sort of random fashion, because again, limited to technology, not being able to do like a PowerPoint or anything for this, so you'll have nothing particularly great to look at whilst this is going on, and I include myself in that description. The talk that I'll do will probably hop about quite a bit as well. It's based on various notes and things that I've found and put together from what other people have done on the history of Heptonstall Museum. As I say, I don't consider myself an expert on the subject in any way, shape or form. Some of it will probably be a bit basic for some of you, stuff that you'll already know. If I waffle on too long, then hopefully Michael or somebody else will intervene and shut me up. So Heptonstall Museum is housed in what was originally the grammar school in the village. The grammar school originally set up in 1642, but the building that's there now was rebuilt in around 1771. So it's an 18th century building that you visit and see as the museum. A lot of people think it quite curious that a village as small as Heptonstall should actually house something like a grammar school, and a significant one. And to understand why there was a grammar school there in the first place, we have to look further back in history and the history of Heptonstall itself. Again, I know a lot of you already know this, but I'll cover the elements of it, and hopefully reasonably quickly. So the ancient parish of Halifax is very large. It's very similar to the size of Calderdale today. With travel being difficult in medieval times, and such an extensive parish, there was a need to split the parish up in order to tackle the administration of it. So registering births, deaths, marriages, and things like that, and the ecclesiastical side of administration meant that they divided the parish of Halifax up into 3 different parts. The main part was the parochial district, which was centred on Halifax and the parish church there. And that comprised the townships of Sorby, Midgley, Worley, Ovenden, Skirkett, Shelf, Hipperholme, and North Aram and South Aram. And then there were 2 chapelries. One was at Elland, serving the lower valley townships of Rishworth, Soyland, Barkisland, Stainland, Norland, Rastrick, Bixby, Elland, and Greetland. Needless to say, I can't remember these. I am reading this off a list. The other, Heptonstall, serving the needs of the upper valley of the townships of Heptonstall, Stansfield, Langfield, Errington, and Wadsworth. And the chapel at Heptonstall that was constructed in the early 1200s was devoted to Thomas Becket before he became a Becket, and he was the chap who was murdered in December. And here comes the cat. Oh dear. Lost my place there. In 1170, and canonized in 1173, and was a symbol of a popular symbol at the time of resistance to Norman rule. With Calderdale museums, we're lucky to still have the parish of Halifax. So our history in Calderdale, there's so much of it, relates very well to the old parish of Halifax, with small additions and subtractions around the edges, such as gaining Todmorden and Shelf and places like that. So why a grammar school in Heptonstall? Going back to the Middle Ages, there was no formal systems of education, and local education that existed at the time was often the responsibility of the church, with boys being taught by priests or monks in chapel schools and things like that. But then along came the Reformation in the 1530s and 40s, and the destruction of the monasteries and the removal of a lot of power of the church. And a lot of these schools were then closed down under the Chantries Act of 1545. In response to this loss, new day schools were set up and established to serve the needs of local communities, often founded by acts of private charity, whereby donations were made to support the maintenance of a schoolhouse and its masters. This meant that children, admittedly mostly boys, could be educated locally rather than necessarily being sent away to more like boarding schools and things like that. So Heptonstall's own importance at the time meant that it was a centre of ecclesiastical administration, and therefore was a sensible place to also set up the school. The present school was endowed in July 1642 by the will of Reverend Charles Greenwood. originally from nearby Greenwood Lee, and he was at that time Lord of the Manor of Heptonstall. And I have a little bit here to read out from Reverend Greenwood's will for setting it up. The Reverend Charles Greenwood, by a deed dated July 14, 1642, and by his will of the same date, made in execution of a power served by the deed, conveyed and appointed to John Greenwood and 4 other trustees and their heirs, a house built by him for a schoolhouse, and 2 messuages and farms in Colden and Heptonstall, to the intent that after his decease, the house should be used for the purpose of a free grammar school for the children of the inhabitants of the town and township of Heptonstall, and that the trustees and the survivors of them and his heirs should be seized of the 2 messages and premises in Colden to the use and maintenance of a schoolmaster who had well profited in learning to teach the children of the inhabitants of Heptonstall within the schoolhouse. The school itself, as a grammar school, did focus quite a lot on the what were the learned languages, or sometimes dead languages of the time, particularly teaching of Latin and Greek. And the 2 properties there that were mentioned, the idea of putting those in along with the school, as well as I think it's called School Field, is that money that would come from the rents and from those properties would then be used to help support the school, as well as the fees that were charged to the boys that would be attending. Records refer to schoolmasters at Heptonstall from the 1560s. So it's likely that this bequest was intended to provide permanent financial stability for the upkeep of an existing school. So for 250 years or so, the grammar school provided an education for boys from the Upper Valley, who were able to afford the tuition fees, but not sufficiently wealthy to go away to boarding school and gain what may be considered more of a gentleman's education. The grammar school operated and finally closed in 1889. And then in 1898, the building was conveyed to the Yorkshire Penny Bank and remained as a Heptonstall branch until 1954. Fortunately, the Yorkshire Penny Bank were aware of the significance of the building and the objects that were in there, and were very careful to preserve what they had inherited. They retained the headmaster's desk, the students' tables and benches, and a bookcase along with the books which remain in there today. Alongside the school were 2 cottages, very simple sort of one up, one down affairs, and underneath were some underdwellings. And these were occupied in the 18th century, and we do have within the school some of the books and records of the rents that were being paid for these properties. Hopping about a bit, we can think again of the significance of Heptonstall is going back thousands of years to we're very familiar now with the Upper Valley area and all the routes of transport being down in the valleys. And you've got that familiar crossing of the road, the railway and the canal. But going further back, travel up and down the valleys was not a convenient way of traveling through the area and crossing the Pennines at all, because without all the bridges, you would constantly be coming across streams and fords and things. So ancient travel across the Pennines tended to stick to the high ground rather than going up and down the valleys. And we have determined routes across the Pennines that go back to the Mesolithic times, and there have been finds in the area around Heptonstall and further up into the Pennines that show that there's been constant habitation in the area for thousands of years. So as a place for a museum, Heptonstall again is really significant in telling that story of ancient connections to the landscape. Interestingly, there are Roman roads that run up towards there, but then they don't actually continue across the Pennines. Now, our thinking on this is that the tracks that were going across the Pennines were actually good enough for the Romans to use. So the Romans weren't daft; they wouldn't build a road if they didn't need to. They used the existing trackways that were there as their crossing points for the Pennines. So yeah, we can follow those. Yeah, the whole setup of Halifax is there and is significant, and the parish church was built next to the crossing over the Hebble, because when you get to Halifax, you have to cross that in order to continue. So yeah, that trackway does go back a very long time, and I know that there have been some significant finds and connections with the some of the Hebden Bridge Historical Society and archaeology that's coming out of the area. We're still trying to find the significant settlement, but another theory on that is it's probably there, but is now covered in peat, because the peat layers build up very quickly over the years, and anything from the previous to the Iron Age is quite possibly still there, but underneath the peat. But we haven't yet found the exact places where settlement was in that area. We suspect it's somewhere between sort of Heptonstall and Widderth, around there. That was just a quick prehistoric tangent I went off on there. Interestingly, 1642, for a time to have set up the grammar school at Heptonstall, is at the beginning of the English Civil War. Now, I could rattle on for quite a while on the story of the what happened in the English Civil War, but I think that's probably a whole nother talk, and I'm sure you've either had it or will get it at a future date. There is it is a very interesting tale, and one that's often not known outside the area, just how significant Heptonstall was during the English Civil War as a parliamentarian stronghold. Oh, sorry, just been attacked by a cat. that wasn't planned. That's not part of the talk. Nix, go on, away with you.
This is going to be on YouTube, Richard. You know that.
Yes, I dare say, be one of those moments, won't it? That's a good way of ruining your train of thought, isn't it? Yeah, significant things in the area was it was a parliamentarian stronghold throughout the whole of the region, and until Newcastle came down and was invited down and to support the royalist cause, and he came down. They sieged Hull, and there was the Battle of Adwalton Moor, which is just up the road from where I live, and the routes of the retreat of the parliamentarians from Adwalton Moor go up the Shibden Valley and through Halifax, and the but a stronghold held out at Heptonstall, which is a naturally defensive position, was fantastic. It's defended on three sides by very steep inclines, rising about 500 feet up from the valley bottom. And on the other side, you go basically going across the moors and the Pennines. So to actually attack the town itself was very difficult. There was, to cut a long story short, there was a lot of toing and froing up and down the Calder Valley, with the Royalists in Halifax and around that area, and the parliamentarians in Heptonstall and based there. They were supported by troops coming over from Lancashire to support the parliamentarians. A foray was made to attack Halifax, and that got overstretched, and they realised that they'd gone a bit far and got cut off, and had to fight their way back through. There were engagements at Bloody Field and at what is called the beautifully named Slaughter Gap. And Slaughter Gap gives the Battle of Slaughter Gap gives you this impression of a particularly bloody and hard-fought engagement. The reality of it was that there was one person killed and several wounded and captured. But the significance of that was more that the pushing the parliamentarians back into defending Heptonstall. Heptonstall was then in turn assaulted, and there were several hundred troops, I think 400 infantry and 400 cavalry came from the Halifax region and went out to attack Heptonstall at 3 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of November. Not the best time to do it, in driving rain, as you often get in the area. And they were attacking up from Hebden Bridge, but the parliamentarians had prepared for it and rolled boulders down on them and assaulted them from above, driving them back down. The river was in spate at the time, it having rained a lot, and there was a natural bottleneck on the bridge in Hebden Bridge, and so a lot of them tried their chances in the current, but got swept away, and many were drowned, as well as those who were killed in the assault, and the parliamentarians held out. Eventually, when Royalist when the Royalists were more dominant in the area and were faring better, they returned to Heptonstall, but when they got there, the parliamentarians had in fact pulled out to Lancashire. Similarly, when the pendulum swung the other way and the parliamentarians were more forceful and stronger in the area, they moved on Halifax, and similarly most of the troops had removed, the Royalists had then by that time removed from Halifax, and the rest, as they say, is history. There is a fascinating story of that. Other great stories for the area that you doubtless know about and will have other talks on, I'm sure, are the famous or even infamous Cragbale coiners, with a direct connection to Heptonstall, even though they were operating out of Bell House, which is up Cragbale. There were incidents in Heptonstall, and David Hartley, King David, who was the leader of the Cragbale coiners, is buried in the churchyard there. Quite an unusual churchyard in that it's got two churches in it, as the the new one was rebuilt. There's only a few places in the country where you actually get two churches in the one churchyard. And then there's other significant people in the churchyard. Again, that sort of other parts of the story. The Cragvale coin is obviously the murder of Dayton, who was the tax collector, and initially his two assailants were acquitted on lack of evidence, but later evidence was given, and they were both then taken to York Assizes and were found guilty and were executed. Their bodies were then hung in chains on Beacon Hill in Halifax, pointing at the scene of the crime where they'd killed him. Bringing the story of Heptonstall and the museum a little bit more up to date then, the Yorkshire Penny Bank had preserved a lot of the artifacts in the museum, but when they closed down in the 1950s, those items were still in there, and in 1971 the district council opened it as a museum for the first time. It then passed on to Calderdale with the changes in local government reorganisation in 1974, and has been a museum with Calderdale since. The displays and things in there have changed over the years. Some of you will probably remember the older displays from the late 20th century. Gosh, that sounds weird now, saying it like that, like it's another century, doesn't it? It's when you point out that it's 21 years ago as well. But, by the around about 2008, I think it was, a lot of those displays had got quite tired. They were rather old style museum with lots of Hessian and lots of social history items that didn't necessarily relate to Heptonstall. And so a major refurbishment of the museum was undertaken. And we looked at the various stories and histories that related more directly to Heptonstall. And with the help of Jeff Wilkinson, who was the curator at the time, we managed to redisplay Heptonstall Museum, took out a lot of the partitions and things that had been put in there that made the main schoolroom it made it feel a lot smaller and darker. When those partitions were taken out, we were able to open up the room that you see as the museum now, and also put new interpretation in there, going back to the archaeology, the Civil War, the church, the school, local pastimes such as Nur and Spell, and also linked with groups like the Alice Longstaff collection. We were able to display photographs and images from that of the local area. We've done a number of temporary exhibitions over the years looking at folklore, the railway and building of the reservoirs, the co-op and cooperative movement and how significant that was in the area, and looking at things like that. So the potential, I think, for a future for the museum is very good, because there's a lot of history in the area, either directly relating to Heptonstall or to the Upper Valley area of Calderdale. In 2017, I think the with austerity and other measures within Calderdale, Calderdale realised that the number of buildings that it had was quite a burden in terms of looking after and maintaining all the buildings in Calderdale. And at that time, the parish council were approached to see whether there may be interest in an alternative future for the museum and somebody else to run it. And then this is where the Historical Society comes in, and it was first formed, I think the first meetings were 2018, is that right, Michael?
Yeah, we formed as a result, really, of what you're saying, because I remember you came to the museum, I think it was September-ish, I think it was 2018, one loses track of the years, and then we formed a Historical Society to be that entity that may have to take it on, you know, in the future, and I hope we do, really. Sorry, I interrupted. Carry on. Yeah.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I was just checking that I got the dates.
That was
correct
about right. Yeah.
I don't necessarily have a reference to that. So, yeah, prior to the refurbishment around about 2008, the museum had been charging, I think it was 50 pence for children or OAPs and £1 for adults. It was open for weekends in summer, but was attracting maybe 800 visitors a year, and was bringing in a few £100s. Following the redisplay, one of the things we were able to do was to make it a free museum. And with that, and combined with that and the redisplay, though still only open for Saturdays and Sundays from March through to October, in the first year, the visitor figures went from 800 to 900 a year up to 5,000. And we also found that by having a donations box, we actually got, because more people were coming, even though they weren't charged to enter, they would put donations in, and we were getting a similar amount of money as we had been taking from entry fees to the museum anyway. The future for the museum, I guess, is what the society is all about. And as a museum service, we're reluctant to not be able to continue resourcing it and running it. But we will certainly offer whatever help we can towards the whatever future the museum may have. Obviously, this is more for discussion of the Historical Society and Friends that is currently being set up, and which is partly why I'm here talking about it today. There's some very interesting items in there. As I mentioned, the teacher's desk, which we believe may have been fashioned from a pulpit from the original church, and brought in to be used as the teacher's desk. It's a huge thing. It takes about 4 people to lift it, and you can pretty much just about drag it across the room. Along with that, there's some of the original tables and benches from the grammar school, and they're a wonderful survival. And you know it was a what we'd say a posh school when some of the graffiti on the desks is in Greek. Certainly didn't get that in my school. There's also the bookcase. That has some very interesting items in there on penmanship. I mentioned earlier the Rent books are in there as well. There's some of the old inkwells, lead inkwells, and I think what the other books and things are. I remember accessioning them all back in 2001. Books on obviously algebra, Latin, Greek, arithmetic. There's an atlas and Greek poetry and all sorts of interesting items in there, and some lovely records also from the 1830s and thereabouts, with an interesting one where Robert Sunderland was charged threepence halfpenny for the repair of a window he had broken. And also lots of small items, threepence for paper and quills, notes like that. The rent book, it stated that Widow Cherry paid 2 and 6 per month for her rent. Penmanship was a great thing at the time, and there's copybooks there for practicing penmanship. Interestingly, you had different hands for, in the 18th century, you would be taught a different hand for your official communication and for business than you would use for your private communication. So a lot of people would actually write differently, and they would have different handwriting to if they were writing business letters or if they were writing private letters. That's one of those little interesting bits of history that you come across once in a while that it changes your viewpoint on things, that you actually had to learn different style of handwriting and would use it depending on who you were writing to. I suppose we all learn different styles of communication now with you don't use such formality as letter writing when doing emails, and then emails are more formal than texts or messages or other things. So there are parallels and similarities. I say we don't have masses of information on the history of the building and the school. We have been contacted by many people over the years, often from North America, Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, places like that, who are descendants of the boys who went to Heptonstall Grammar School. And they are looking through for genealogy and records. And it's interesting that some of those boys who were educated at Heptonstall Grammar School went on to become real leaders around the world. And you know, when they went to other countries, these were the men who were pioneering the sort of new world in the 18th, 19th centuries. And for such people to come from such a small place as Heptonstall, I think is quite an achievement, and that their families still know that and come back and relate back to Heptonstall. I'm running out of things to waffle about, but I can waffle on more, or I can take any questions if anybody's got any.
I just think there's so much to go on there, Richard. That's brilliant. First thing is, I always wondered, or you this maybe wonder, why a grammar school was called a grammar school. And I looked it up while you were talking, and as you say, the origins are Greek, and grammatikos is where the word comes from, and it was Greek for letters. Not grammar in as much as the colon versus a semicolon, etc. But when you made reference to different styles of writing, informal, etc., you know, it was about educating young people in letters. I love the references to the Iron Age, and particularly also because I've always wondered why Thomas à Becket, the church, the old church, the ruined church, Thomas à Becket, is consecrated pretty near to his martyrdom, not long after, really. And,
yes.
But now you put it in context that, which, because I thought
it was such a long
way, which I had thought, because we're such a long way from Kent, that well, they wanted Heptonstall to be a centre of pilgrimage because that would bring people, it would bring money, etc. But this idea that it was a symbol of Anglo-Saxon resistance to the Norman conquest, because perhaps, I don't know, within 100 years prior, Heptonstall was at the receiving end of the harrying of the North.
Yes, the one bit I missed there is that Heptonstall isn't listed at the time.
In the Doomsday.
In Doomsday and that thing now. One of the old records I found, which I didn't quote, because I'm not entirely sure how accurate it is, but their theory is that Heptonstall being so defensible, they actually could defend it with a relatively small number of men, and they didn't let them in to come and see what was there.
Right.
And therefore it wasn't recorded in the records at the time. How true that is, or how fanciful that is, I don't know. It would be fascinating to know more, but obviously there's not a lot of records at the time there. So
Ollie Robertshaw's here, isn't he? Because I'm only looking at Richard at the moment. You're there, Ollie, right?
We have got a question from Diana Monaghan about the when did the Heptonstall Heritage Partnership? It was formed in 2007. Why did it stop about 4 years later?
Yeah, I think
Diana, if you want to chip in, if you've got any follow-up questions, please unmute and do so.
Yeah, we formed that at the time with various representatives from the Heptonstall area and from Hebden Bridge and Upper Valley. And it was for general support of the museum and Heptonstall itself. And we would meet on a fairly regular basis, a few times a year. And from that, we had some of the great cooperation from Diana herself and from the people like Frank Woolrich and the Alice Longstaff collection, and we're able to do some of the exhibitions that we put on there. I'm not entirely sure why it finished in the end. It was it was very successful and was certainly useful for us. It's a good question. I don't know why that entirely. It sort of drifted a bit and fizzled out rather than actively being finished or anything. I
wondered if it had just run its course, or whether they would cut back in the council, which meant you couldn't support it and come to meetings.
I mean, going to the meetings, I think we would have still been able to do. I know there was various sort of changes and other things going on, such as the Birchcliffe Centre and things like that. And I know, Frank had been a linchpin of the whole thing very often, and his attention was obviously diverted elsewhere and being stretched and pulled in every direction because he just didn't know how to say no.
Yeah, I mean, I think we wish that there'd been a Heptonstall Historical Society that could have helped to take over from us, because, as you say, we were a bit stretched.
Yes.
I think in the last 10 years, the local history and genealogy has really bloomed, especially with all the use of computers. And I think there's an opportunity now for if you like, church tourism and combined things to make an experience for people coming from all over the world to visit Heptonstall. Mm-hmm. We get lots of queries about genealogy and Heptonstall Church and everything. So.
Yeah. Can I just, I'm going to have to come in here because we've got loads of questions, and there's a question actually related to that from Alison. Said, apart from Sylvia Plath, what other people of note or famous, relatively famous, apart also from Hartley, as you mentioned, are buried in the churchyards?
If that one's directed at me, I'm afraid you caught me there because I can't.
Yeah, well, there's Nathan
looking them up.
Nathan Benavista, you can find out about him on Wikipedia. He was a poet of Italian ancestry who settled in the area and a publisher as well. There's a fair number now of war graves actually that some have been put in new because there's around, but I don't know. Can I've got a load of questions. I'm going to give you a couple at a time. And if somebody else actually, it doesn't all have to be on Richard's shoulder.
Then probably other people can answer these better than I can. Yeah.
The underdwellings, which is from Graham, and I've got a kind of questions. I'd heard that the underdwellings were used as a abattoir, slaughterhouse, at some point. And
yes, I think that is true. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Graham wants to know roughly when they were last occupied, I suppose, as dwellings. Do we know?
Possibly while it was the Yorkshire Penny Bank. There may have still been people in there in the early 20th century.
Really?
But beyond that, they'd certainly be in use. Whether they were living in them at that point, I'm not sure.
Yeah, because it looks like the state that they're in, the last time I was in them, that you can tell that they've been a working area,
yes,
rather than habitation. They've been somewhere where you could just hang up the corpses of.
I think as time has gone on, there used to be quite a lot of buildings like that within the Calderdale area, like the Allen Fold, if people know that's built into the hillside.
Yeah.
As time has gone on, and certainly when you get into the 20th century, people stop wanting to live in those places because they are quite damp. And you do then get health effects of living in damp conditions if you're in an underdwelling and all you've got is a smoky coal fire or peat fire even.
Okay.
Right, I'm going to move. Diana wants to leap in here.
I was going to say the rates books that's in Calderdale Archives would be able to tell you who was living or using them in the 20th century, and also possibly even the electoral registers that are online. You could follow that through and see how long they were lived in for.
Census records might have it as well.
Do you know the little building? This is a question from Graham. The little building on the steps at the side of the school. Do you know that?
Yes.
It's like a bike shed. Was that an outside toilet?
It's an outside toilet, yes.
Yeah. Graham's question, not mine. I just want to say. Now, question from Bruce.
There's still a toilet in there, but it's not linked up. So.
Right. Where are we? Was a question from Bruce. Oh, yes. Is there any evidence of any structure, such as a cross stitch, you'd have to, that would enhance the defence of a village? That's kind of unarchaeological. I do go out.
Oh, right, yeah. I don't know if there is. It would make perfect sense because that would make the place much more defensible. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I'm sure we came across something like that at some point in the past, but we weren't entirely sure whether it was a defensive structure or not.
Okay, there's Joanne Enright, I think it is. Could we have some more information? What do you know a little bit more on the Penny Bank? But just before you do that, there is a booklet, sort of, about 100 pages on the English Civil War, Halifax Cavaliers and Heptonstall Roundheads by David Shires. I've read. It's hard to get hold of now, but if you go on ABE Books or Amazon, you can get it. But a lot of people in the village have them, and they do go through the battle the Battle of Heptonstall and the background to it. Okay, yeah. Anything more you know, Richard, on the Penny Bank?
There are some black and white photographs of the interiors. I think when it was the Penny Bank. The Penny Bank did. I think there is I've got a photocopy of a publication that I will, at which some of my notes came from. Was on the Heptonstall Grammar School. This one, I believe this came from a publication by the Penny Bank at the time, because it's by courtesy of Yorkshire Penny Bank, the school premises and contents may be viewed by appointment through the manager of the bank's Hebden Bridge branch, or Mr. Percy Sunderland of 24 Smithwell Lane, Heptonstall, the actuary of the Heptonstall branch of the bank. So that's pretty solid evidence that it was produced at the time that the penny bank was there. Another thing I've failed to mention in my notes was significance of Heptonstall as a trade-in centre as well. The cloth hall, which is next to the through passage, just along from the museum, shows just what an important centre Heptonstall was for the area in terms of trade and administration.
And Diana's put something on here, actually. Hepton Bridge Local History Society has some items in their archive that relate to the school, and there is a book printed by the Penny Bank. Thanks for that, Diana. And Mary Ellen asked a question really early on, which I think is going to be important, or could be, for friends of the museum. That is, did you keep, have you got any contacts? So, you know, have you kept records of these people who are very rich and, you know, powerful in America, Australia, New Zealand, etc., etc.? We'd love to get in touch with them.
I don't think we have got contact details for them. They've been sort of random inquiries over the years.
I get that.
Yeah.
I got a guy from Los Angeles the other day, you know, and someone from Victoria in Australia. Could I take a photograph of her ancestor? He's buried somewhere in the Heptonstall area. Could I take a photograph of the headstone, you know? And you know, okay. Let's have a look, see if I've got, Ollie's chipped in because he's given us, somebody's asking, you know, how would you fill a grammar school? Well, according to the 1801 census, Ollie's put there were about 3,000 people living in the area.
The school was presumably quite small and only had 10, 20, 30 kids at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one class.
Ollie, could you come in, if at the top of your head, you know when Richard was talking about the Doomsday Book, because you wrote the page on our website about the manor of Heptonstall, didn't you, I think? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Heptonstall's not mentioned in Doomsday, and there's no. I think the short answer is no one really knows why. Some people think there's a weird place called Crumbertoniston that's mentioned, although people think that's Cruttonstall. I think some people think they just forgot to write it in because it says there's 9 townships, but then it only lists 8. And I don't know. My personal feeling is it simply didn't exist. It's a tonstall. It was set up probably in the 13th century as a vacary, and maybe there wasn't anything there before then. So I don't know. We won't know. I mean, hopefully one day someone will dig something up and date it to that time. But
literally. Heather asked a question. I missed that one. Sorry, Heather. What was the property at Colden you mentioned?
There's some weavers' cottages areas with a small amount of land associated with them. I'm not entirely sure which are the 2 exact buildings that are referred to in the will. I haven't got that information, but Colden's not that big, so and they would obviously have to have been at least 17th century.
Do you know why, Heather? Is it Stephanie? Yeah. Do we know when the grammar school closed and why? Good question, actually. They didn't have Ofsted, did they, in the 1700s?
They changed the curriculum. That was it. It was right. Here we are. The last master was Henry Jackson, a strict disciplinarian of the old type, apparently. In private life, a man of upright and high religious character. The school was ordered to be sold in 1894, the school itself having been closed some time previously. And this is when it then goes over to the Penny Bank. In 1898, the school building was conveyed to the Yorkshire Penny Bank, who have taken care to preserve the character and atmosphere of the building.
Do we want to Linda, shall we say something about where we're up to with the Friends group? Because it's, I don't know if everybody knows. I mean, I'll just, Richard, we referred to it in 2018, there was a question mark hanging over the museum. Richard came, I think it was late summer, we had a meeting in the museum. In fact, we were rehearsing the community play that we did on the Battle of Heptonstall at the time, and half the cast were in the meeting, and we set up the Historical Society because you were explaining really that at some point there needs to be something in the community that's going to take on the management of the museum, because it seemed, I mean, you were saying this is the direction the wind was blowing, and so we set up the Historical Society a couple of years ago. And then I can't remember when it was, Linda spotted on called a website that the museum was up for asset transfer. I, as Secretary of the Historical Society, had a Zoom meeting with Sarah Richardson, Jenny Lynn, is it Lynn, and yourself, didn't we? And they said they were going to invite Heptonstall Parish Council, that we weren't really, big enough as, and didn't have the longevity to take it on. I was somewhat relieved. Parish Council have looked at it. It's a massive job because the building's so old. There's a huge amount of money that needs to be spent on repairs. So where we've got to, discussion with the Parish Council, etc., is we are putting together a Friends of Heptonstall Museum work. We have a working group. I'm going to bring Linda in now, and we will hopefully put a case together to make an expression of interest as a consortium. Linda, do you want to come in? Because Linda's heading it up as the project manager.
Yes, I mean, we're really at very, very early stages, but we've been lucky enough, thanks to the efforts of Michael and Marguerite in particular, to make contact with people. So we've got representatives from the Arvin Foundation, the Elmit Trust, the Civic Trust, the Parish Council, the headmaster of the school is going to attend, Karen Marshall from the church is going to attend. Andrew Bibby is going to offer ad hoc advice to us, which will be really helpful. So we're trying to have a representative group to look at the expression of interest and work out the best way forward. Obviously, it is a huge task because the building needs quite a lot of work done on it, and we need to work out something which is going to be viable, something which is going to be sustainable, and probably we would be looking to get some sort of monies from the Heritage Lottery Fund to help with that work. So we do need to pull together something which is going to look very attractive, very sustainable, be able to be reasonably solid against things like COVID, which has hit so many small museums and sort of arts organisations over the last year. So we got a lot of enthusiasm. We did a survey, which hopefully everyone here has seen and filled in. So there's a lot of local support for the museum. There's a lot of affection for the museum. There's a strong desire to keep the history of museum within the village and to hopefully draw in more visitors. And there's so many ways that we can make more of that history and those sort of links to people like Hughes and Plath, make more of the writing networks, make more of the artistic networks. So there's a lot to sift through and sort of come up with a viable business plan. But we have got a very strong group, hopefully, which is going to start work on that. So yeah, that's basically where we are.
One thing I'd like to chip in there, excuse the cat, is the I think the building needs more use. We were only able to staff it for weekends in summer, March through to October. To have a lovely building like that in the middle of Heptonstall, in the heart of the village, it's crying out to be used more. I think I noticed in the comments did pop up, yes, work was done about 2008 and the roof was redone and the pointing was redone. So yeah, there has been some maintenance and stuff on the building, but with 18th century buildings, there's always something needs doing, and something to look at. Plus, it could be that the building could be repurposed and you know, sort of look at change of use and you know, different access to it and things like that. The one problem with Heptonstall is there are steps everywhere, and disabled access has always been a problem. Now, it might be that something could be done in order to actually get some sort of level access to the building from the main road. But minor works would certainly need to be done to pavement edges and things like that to achieve it. So, yeah.
That was one of the strong messages which came out from the survey, that people really want to, they see the museum as having the potential to be a real community space as well, with lots of groups and individuals being able to use it more. So certainly that will be something the working group will consider. It's hard at the moment because we don't really know what our options are for changing the use of the building around, but we will look at that.
We could, we might have to charge people to get in, or I've got another idea. It's free to get in. We have to we charge people to get out. Really? Quite a lot of money or something like that. Diana's got a hand up.
Yeah, I was just saying that when they charged it, the problem was that people made a one-off visit, whereas when we decided to do away with the charge, people were making repeat visits and putting stuff in the donation box, and also the shop. We revamped the shop, and that made a lot more money. So, I mean, I, for one, for example, when we had visitors, I would take them up Heptonstall and show them around the museum, whereas if I'd just being the one, so I would probably not go again if it hadn't changed the displays or anything. So that was another reason for doing the temporary exhibitions, to make it so that people would make return visits. And I think if you charge, you find that puts people off doing the repeat visits.
Thank you. Okay. What are you thinking if there's any more questions? The next event from Heptonstall Historical Society is our annual general meeting, which we haven't had because of COVID. And that's going to be on the 28th of February, and we'll have a very exciting financial report, secretary's report of all the people that have joined. But also we will bring you an update on the museum, because things are sort of, well, they're moving, and it's also good to hear from people. And the committee, the steering committee is up. Well, actually, nominations closed without anybody wanting to come onto the committee as well. But there's all kinds of roles and ways that members can get involved. And Ollie's really sort of kicked off a family history discussion in the group, and has done loads of work. But I also think there's other areas, and I know COVID is sort of well, I won't use that word, but it's put everything in abeyance. But I'd like to see, come the summer and when things open up, that we could have I've got a metal detector. I go out with a chap and we'd be metal detecting around the church. We get the church's permission, of course, and things like that. It would be great to have a metal detecting group in the village, or some kind of archaeology group, or also, as we said, the further back you go, the more the women are completely written out, really, of the records and stuff, and a women's history group if people want. So, and then the next meeting is on the 3rd of March.
Mike, Marguerite's got her hand up.
Yeah, I can't see.
Talk.
All right, okay.
Marguerite wants to talk.
Go on, Marguerite.
I just wanted to ask a question.
All right.
Relating to the grammar school,
yeah,
and the building of the new Heptonstall school, as it was, because there was an overlap, and the new school was built in, I think, 1879. Now, in 1870, there was Forster's Education Act, that said that there should be schooling for all children. And I wondered kind of if there was anything in the history that kind of overlapped the two schools in terms of the children who attended, and the fact that there was an overlap of the two schools in the village at the same time, even though it was just sort of maybe 10 years or so. That was my question.
Right, has anybody got an answer or a place that we can find out the answer out?
We do have David Perrins doing his talk later on in the year, so he might be the one to, might have to park that question for a bit.
Yeah, we've got to.
I just wanted to raise it.
Yeah, no, it's you know, and David has written a book, isn't it? It's a PDF.
Yeah,
publication.
I know, I've got it.
Yeah, and he's doing a talk on the history of his building or his school where he works later on in the year. Linda,
there might be something in the logbook. There might be something in the school logbook.
Thank you, Diana.
Okay. Linda, the meeting on 3rd of March, the man who really broke the bank at Monte Carlo. Can you tell us a little bit about more?
Yes, and Fletcher. It's really based on her own family history. It isn't the chap who the song was written about, that well-known song, but he's a very interesting character. He did go and he did break the bank of Monte Carlo, but it's sort of a mixture of a very interesting life story in this particular man, but also how Anne did the research and all those sorts of bumps and you come across when you're doing family history, and then suddenly you find connections in families that you didn't know about who feed into it. So it's quite an interesting story on two fronts, that she does sort of share how she approached going about getting the family history, and then we find out more about her relative himself. Yeah, and it's a very interesting story, and she's a very good speaker, so I hope you'll all come along to that because it should be a good talk.
Okay, I think we'll wrap up there. Just to say that all talks are free if you're a member of the Historical Society. You can join for £5. You go onto our website, hhh-s.com, or just Google Heptonstall Historical Society, it'll take you to it, and we have a membership page. You can pay on PayPal, thanks to Wally, and or you can just, you know, there's an address to which you can give £5. We're really an online society, you know, for the time being, and all we need is £5 and an email address, and you're in. And that's £5 for the whole year. Otherwise, meetings are £3 throw, and we advertise them on Eventbrite. But do think about joining as well. Look, can we thank Richard? It's been brilliant. It's terrific what you've done. A tour around Heptonstall, and thank you all for coming, and for Linda and Diana and chipping in so much. It's good. And look, we hope that there's a future as well as a history for that museum, and we're doing our best. We're taking a lot on, but we're not giving up without a fight, okay? Because who said history's in the past? It's not even in the past. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Stay safe. Take care.
Thank you.